Hi, this is Ryan with Zoomdata. Today I'm going to walk you through importing an already built chart. We're going to use an example from Google's chart library, and what we're going to do is we're going to modify it so that it works with Zoomdata using the Zoomdata Chart Studio, so you can use it in all of your Zoomdata applications. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up Chart Studio after we've logged in, and we're going to create a new blank chart. Zoomdata comes with a number of templates, but we're going to start blank. So we'll call it Google Pie Chart because that's what we're going to use. And we will use our Baltimore crime data set, and we'll set up a few defaults and we'll accept. Now what we have here in Zoomdata's Chart Studio on the left-hand side is a little simple IDE. And then on the right-hand side, we have a what you see is what you get environment to show you what your current code does. The first thing we have is a controller object, and controller is responsible for integrating your chart code with Zoomdata. And so we call controller's create access label method to create this clickable access label. This clickable access label only appears in the Zoomdata application, but the underlying data structures provide the data you need to create your own in an embedded environment. So we have crime code, description, all the other columns that we have in our particular data set. So a couple other things I want to point out are that we have controller.element. Controller.element is meant to be read only and never written to. It's where Zoomdata stores the current element of our custom chart. Right now it's going to be, you'll see if I look at it, look at the console log, you'll see that the element is right here. It's a div with the class name widget content small. And when we embed in a custom application or when we have this in a Zoomdata dashboard, that name will change. Controller always updates it, so Zoomdata always knows where to put your visualization. We also have two other methods that get called by Zoomdata automatically: controller.update and controller.resize. Update is called when there's new data available, and resize is called when the size of the element is changed. Now we're going to look at some Google code. I'm just going to grab Google's pie chart. It looks pretty nice, and I like it, and it's very simple and straightforward. And here's their code. We don't need all of the code, but we're going to need some of it. I'm going to copy what we need into our Chart Studio, and it's going to break Chart Studio essentially. Like, nothing's going to display. Don't worry about that for now. Don't worry about the syntax errors, because we're really just using this so that we have the Google code in front of us, and we'll work through piece by piece. Now, some of this is only going to be applicable to Google Charts, but I'm going to call out the things you need to do to make it work with any chart that you care to import, really. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we have any libraries that Google is dependent on added to our Zoomdata environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up this Google library. There it is. It's minified, obviously. And you see, I know that the Google chart wants it because the Google self-contained HTML that we copied that has the HTML and the JavaScript, it links to this library. So we definitely need that. So I've got the library here, and I'm going to save this to my desktop under the name local.js. Loader.js, I'm sorry, because that's what Google wants it called. And now I'm going to import this library into the Zoomdata environment because Zoomdata doesn't come with that. How do we do that? Well, we use the manage libraries and we add an available library. And we're going to call it loader.js, and we're going to pick from our desktop the loader.js file right there. Upload it, and now if we look, it's now available in our list of available libraries. We can drag and drop it to the included libraries section and then press accept. Now this library will be loaded in to our environment whenever we load this chart. That library will be local only to this chart. So if you have different charts going on in your dashboard or in an embedded environment, this loader.js will only be in scope for this visualization. Okay, so we'll remove that since we're done dealing with it. The next thing we have to do is we have to look and see how Google wants its data. It needs to be an array of arrays, and the first entry in the array of arrays is the header column, task and hours per day in this case, and then each of the tasks and each of the columns. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at Zoomdata's data and we're going to transform it to be in the shape that Google expects it to be in for its chart to work. So now Zoomdata calls, as I mentioned before, controller.update whenever new data arrives. So what we're going to do is we're going to just console log the data and see what comes in. Here's our data. And what Zoomdata delivers is an array of objects. Each object is a data packet, and there's going to be a few things going on in it. The first one is the current metric. In this case, it's the volume, which internally is called count, and it's just the number of entries. And the second one is the current grouping, and the grouping that has that count is Northeastern. In this data set, the Northeastern district has 718 entries. And we know we're dealing with districts because if we look over here, the label selector, we see the group is set to district. If we switch this over to, say, weapon, we're going to get a new data packet. This will have fewer options because there are fewer weapons than there are districts. And the current one will be none, no weapon. The second one will be hands. The third one will be firearms. And each one of these has a count. That is the number of records with that weapon, firearm, hands, and so on. In our previous data set, it was 718 records in the Northeastern District, 450 records in the Northern District, and so on. So this is the shape of the Zoomdata data. So what we're going to do is we're going to transform the Zoomdata data into the shape that the Google chart is expecting it. Your particular charting library and the particular shape that it wants its data in is going to vary. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable that we're going to use an array of arrays to populate with data as it comes in into the format that Google wants it in for this Google chart. So let's create our array of arrays. We'll call it var data for Google chart equals, Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to push into it a single array. We'll call it wedge and quantity. And these are our headers. Now the next thing we're going to do is for each incoming packet of data, we're going to take the data out, massage it, and put it into our new array of arrays. So we will do data.forEach. We're going to make a function and we're going to pass to it each individual bit of data, which we'll call datum. Each one of those is one of those data objects from our data array. And then in here, we will do our manipulation to create a row, and it's going to look like that. But then in the row, we're going to put datum group 0, which is going to give us the particular wedge of the pie, and then the quantity. And the quantity is going to be datum.current.count. So we've created our new row, and then we're going to do data for Google chart.push, and we'll push into it our new row. And then at the end of this, we should have an array of arrays. And what we'll do is we'll prove it by console logging our array of arrays. Let's run it. And let's see what we get. Here's our data for Google chart. And sure enough, we have an array that has wedge and quantity, and then each of our items is northeastern 718, northern 450, central 428, and so on. So we have our data in more or less the shape that Google wants it in. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this console log then, since we know that's right. And I'll get rid of this console log since we know that's right. The next thing we need to do is we need to set our options, because Google's drawing chart thing wants an options. So we're going to create an option variable. And right now we'll just leave it with Google's default. So we've got that. Now we need to have create a new chart. This is something that Google does. Create, and we're going to change the name to be the Google chart to keep everything nice and clear, equals a new google.visualization.py chart. Now, something else I have to show about the way that Google wants everything to work is Google actually loads its chart packages, individual charts, at runtime as needed. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the line of code that does that, and we're going to put that in here outside of our controller update function. And the reason is because we don't want that to reload every time we get new data. We just need to do it once. So that's going to load that. Now, another trick is that Google has, this introduces an element of asynchronicity, doesn't it? Because Google's going to load this chart package, but it might take 5 minutes before Google's loaded its chart package and is ready to go. Google has this asynchronicity handled by doing google.charts.setOnLoadCallback to do a callback method, and when the chart package is loaded, then it runs the chart, draw chart. And you may have noticed that we've been taking our code from a method called draw chart. Now, Zoomdata doesn't handle it this way. Zoomdata is going to render every time it gets new data. So we're taking this code out of Google's draw chart method, and we're putting it into Zoomdata's controller.update method. Now the trick is that Zoomdata is going to call controller.update every time it has new data, whether that charts.load has finished loading Google's core chart packages or not. So we're going to solve this problem by doing a little bit of simple asynchronicity handling. And what we're going to do is we're going to take Google's callback method, and we're going to run it right here. But rather than having it call draw chart, which we're not going to have in our code, we're going to have it call an anonymous function that just does this. Watch this. This is amazing. It's very simple, very easy. Empty function that's going to hit a global variable that we will make right here called is Google loaded. Let's just call it Google loaded equals -1, false. And what we're going to do is when Google is loaded, we're going to set Google loaded to be equal true. That's all. Now our controller.update, we're going to have it say if not Google loaded, then we're just going to return. And we're going to break out of controller.update. And so controller.update might get called 50 times and never once try to execute against Google's charts until Google's charts are finished being loaded. Now we've got our method call to create the Google chart. Is going to google.visualization.pie chart. This method will only be available incidentally, mind you, if the Google chart package is loaded. Now notice pie chart wants a document element called pie chart because in the sample, that's what they called the div tag that was going to be holding the pie chart. But remember, in Zoomdata, we have a different way of doing it. Controller.element holds it. And so we are going to replace this with controller.element. That's all. It will then feed that element in to the Google pie chart rendering method, and it will render at controller.element. Excuse me for a minute while I remove unnecessary leftover HTML and stuff that I had copied in from Google Charts. This data Google wants actually isn't just a simple array. Google does some of its own internal massaging with this method. So we're going to use this method in our own code to do the Google massaging to the table that we've created. Remember, we went through and massaged Zoomdata's data into this array of arrays. And now we're going to pass that array of arrays to Google's preparation method that's going to do its massaging. And we're going to call it Googled data. This will avoid any name conflicts since we already have data coming into the method called data coming from Zoomdata. Now we've got our data. We are going to call the Google chart, which is Google's chart that we've now selected to be a pie chart. We're going to call its draw method, and that takes two parameters. The first one is our Googled data, and just to recap, we have data coming in from Zoomdata, and we've massaged it into the tabular format, this array of arrays that Google wants. Then we've passed it to Google's own internal library to massage it into Google's own internal data table format. We're going to pass that into the draw method along with our options, which right now is just a title. And without further ado, we will save it and preview. And we have a Google pie chart. That was pretty straightforward. Now, as we look at the chart, the Google chart that we've imported from their library into the Zoomdata charts gallery, we'll see a few things. First, they have a key that we may or may not want to use. Google provides options for turning that on or off, but we'll leave that alone for now. But another thing is that you'll see that this My Daily Activities doesn't really fit. So we're going to go back to options and comment out Google's title. Then we'll preview and see what we have. Excellent. Now, another thing to notice is that this clickable label, remember up here, controller.createAccess label, the clickable access label, actually allows the user to pick the data they want to send in. So we'll switch to weapons and see instead we have weapon data. Because that clickable label actually controls the data that flows into controller.updates data parameter. If you're embedding into a custom application, how that data actually gets determined is a different video. Now, one last but very important step is handling widget resizing. So if the space in which the chart is rendered becomes resized by some other event, then our chart is able to respond accordingly. Now, Google handles a lot of this for us because it simply does a re-rendering, but we're going to have to tell it to do so. So without doing a resize method, look what we have. As we expand and contract our widget, the rendering isn't right. We lose actually the whole chart at some point. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some code to handle this. Zoomdata gives us controller.resize, which actually handles the resizing. Now we're going to do a slightly simple hacky way to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to just call controller to update again, and let it re-render. But controller to update needs data, if you recall, and it also needs a progress. So we're gonna, again, jerry-rig these up a little bit, but it will work and it will kind of show you the point. We're gonna make two variables called resize data and resize progress. And then every time the update runs, it's just gonna store its data in these relatively global variables. Equals data and resize progress equals progress. And then if we need to update because of a resizing event, we will pass in resize data and resize progress, which are really just the last data and progress counter that Zoomdata had when it rendered. So it's going to re-render with the same data, but with the new size. And we'll save, and we'll see what happens. You see, as we shrink and grow our window, the resizing triggers the update method. Update then calls Google to re-render the chart with a new size. And that's how resizing works. So to recap, we transformed the data from Zoomdata into the format that our chart library, in this case Google, wanted. We took the code and from the chart library that was used to manage the chart library and call its methods to render the chart, and we brought that into the update method. We also quickly handled an async problem that happens because of Google's particular way of loading chart packages. And then we coded a very simple, quick and dirty way of managing resizes. Each of these could be done in more depth, but this makes the basic point. And in future videos, we'll show you how to do some other things that help Zoomdata's widget respond to the Zoomdata data.